Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. It is December the 14th. We are set for day 14 of our Advent series. Kip here, your happy reformer. Let's get into it. But this morning, what I want to do, I want to read a couple quotes and we'll just comment a little bit out of this book called Incarnation. This is from Thomas F. Torrance, a theologian out of Aberdeen, Scotland. The guy is phenomenal. He and his brother, both theologians. Um, and this entire book is obviously on the incarnation. And he does tie it in through the entirety of time, taking it all the way back to even how the incarnation was, how we view Israel through that. And there's going to be a quote on that we'll talk about. But I just want to read you a couple things because his take on this and the way that he's able to phrase things is quite phenomenal, in my opinion. Theologically, we must say that when the Son of God breaks into that historic development, he throws it all into critical reorientation. The prehistory is critically and creatively reinterpreted by the incarnate Word. And it is only in that light that we must look at the prehistory of the incarnation in Israel. What he's saying is, when we read the Old Testament and we look through the lens and we look through this idea of Israel, because of the incarnation, we have to look now at Israel through the lens of the incarnation. Very similar to what we've been talking about, saying we have to view the Old Testament or the entirety of Scripture through a Christological lens. If we're not seeing it through that lens, we are misseeing it. He says, not only is the bond, what are the consequences of sin? Not only is the bond of communion between God and man broken, issuing in man's guilty fear of God, but the bond between man and woman is impaired. The man-woman relationship is involved in the broken relationship with God. With the bond between them broken, man and woman are individualized, and each is turned in upon himself or herself. But even the unity of man as male and the unity of woman as female within the individual heart is disrupted in the knowledge of good and evil. Each knows that he or she is no longer what he or she ought to be. And if we're honest with ourselves, we've all been in that spot. Thus, the rupture in the relation between God and man and woman entails a rupture within each between what a person is and what the person ought to be. Once the constitutive bond between God and man is broken, every other relation suffers irreparable damage. Why do we have broken homes, broken families, broken relationships, broken business friends and relationships? Our society is fractured at every level. And it is a result. Oh, it's just this fallen nature. It's just sin. I mean, yes, yes, and yes, but it is the result of us being broken from God. And so we find the relation between man and the environment broken. Mankind is out of gear with nature, and anxiety characterizes their life. I don't know about you, but there are many people in my life that live with anxiety about everything. It's a result of this broken relationship. On one side is the story of the atomization of mankind, for the internal rupture results in individualization and conflict. On the other end is the story of human attempts at re-socialization, great attempts to mend the broken relations, to heal the internal rupture, to bind divided humanity together again, such as Babel. But all the attempts to heal man partake of our fallen nature and cannot but give new orientation in sin to the broken relationship with God, so that all attempts break themselves on the divine judgment and result in further disintegration. Mankind is unable to resocialize itself, unable to heal its internal rupture, for that which really makes man is the bond between man and God. Now, just a couple more here, and we're going to tie this up this morning. Here it is. The only answer to man's predicament is the destruction of the power of evil and a recreation of the bond between God and man. But if the first creation was the creation of man in the image of God, the recreation is through an act in which God condescends to take on himself the image of man. The whole movement of redemption, adumbrated this from the start, is a movement of God's coming to man in order to restore man to God, of God taking man's place in order to give man God's place. The principle of substitution and the principle of incarnation. Now that's wordy and deep, and I'm just speaking it. And if you're hearing it, you may have to re-listen to it. I have to read it multiple times as I'm going through these things because it just, but the power of those statements. And again, that last one starts in a movement of God coming to man in order to restore man to God, of God taking man's place in order to give man God's place. The principle of substitution and the principle of incarnation. Substitution and free grace are identical. It is the way in which God comes to in pure grace to gather frail humanity into covenant and communion with himself, and even provides for man a covenanted way of response to God's grace. Now, apologize for a bit of reading this morning. Not really, because that's good stuff. I also highly recommend get on your Amazon or whatever and get this book. He has another book about the same size called Atonement. They kind of go hand in hand, Incarnation and Atonement. This is a theological book. It is a little wordy. Depending on your level, it may take you a few times. A slow read it takes me a slow read because I want to absorb it all, but it is fantastic and wonderful, and I highly recommend it. And again, because this subject is of utmost importance. So just to wrap up this morning, again, from those, and not that I can wrap up what Torrance said by any means, but the incarnation, just like Athanasius said, just like C.S. Lewis said, we've looked at those quotes. God, through the incarnation, the Son of God, became the sons, like the sons of men, so that the sons of men could become the sons of God. This substitutionary. See, a good friend of mine, John Crowder, says this statement's been saying it for years. Jesus did not come to be your example. He came to be your substitute. Think about that. I know that flies against everything you probably heard in church, but think about it. Jesus did not come to be your example. He came to be your substitute. That is the incarnation. And that is the glory of the gospel, because the thing that we couldn't do, he has done in our place as us and for us, so that we can enter into the benefit of that dealing, that sacrifice, that redemption. And that's the glory of the incarnation. Hope you guys have a great Thursday. We will see you tomorrow for the next episode, if you will, of our Advent series. Cheers.